The 1994 World Cup changed soccer in America forever. Now fast forward 32 years and we will have the 2026 World Cup that will also be hosted in the United States. Could the 2026 World Cup have a much larger impact than the 1994 one? Is the 2026 World Cup the most important one in US men's national team history? Well, today we will bring someone that lived through the pre-94 World Cup soccer landscape in America. He even played in the 1994 World Cup. He is a US men's national team legend, and his name is Tab Ramos. He's essentially the perfect guest for this episode. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and welcome to this two-part interview with US men's national team legend Tab Ramos. In case you don't know, Tab played 3 World Cups for the United States men's national team. He played in 1990, 94, and 98. He coached the US men's national team U20s, played in La Liga, Liga MX, and Major League Soccer. For today's episode, we will be discussing the 94 World Cup, its impact in the United States, Major League Soccer, along with some pro-rel talk and the early days of MLS. Lastly, we're going to get Tab's take on the following questions. Or question, shall I say. And I'd like to know your opinion on it as well. Is the 2026 World Cup the most important in US men's national team history? More than 94? Personally, I think it is. Let me know what you think. And later in the video, we're going to hear what Tab Ramos thinks about this topic. Or shall I say, this question. And part 2 of this interview will be out one day after this episode. So maybe by the time you're watching this, it has already been out. And for that one, we will address the current state of the US men's national team, why Tab Ramos decided to leave the US Soccer Federation and his job with the U20s as the head coach, and whether or not he is worried about the 2026 World Cup. Also, thank you everyone that joined our Patreon to support the channel. If you want to join, the link to our Patreon is in the description of this video. And hitting the like button tells us you enjoy content like this, and that we should seek more guests like Tab Ramos himself. Okay, so you probably already dropped a like in this video, and let me know in the comment section down below, is the 2026 World Cup the most important in US men's national team history? All right, roll the episode. Okay, everyone, today here on Tactical Manager TV, we have another special guest, a very special guest, a U.S. men's national team legend, played in the 1994 World Cup, knows a lot about the current national team, has even worked with a lot of the players that we currently have as a coach. Tab Ramos, welcome to the channel, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me here. I know you guys do a great job, so it's good to be on the show.
Well, it's actually an honor to have you here and to give you the mic today, because my throat is killing me right now, and it's good to have an episode where the guest knows more than me, so he can talk more than myself on my own channel. Tab, this is part 1 of our 2-episode mini series we have here on the channel, and I want to focus on the 1994 World Cup and 2026 World Cup, because these are 2 events that can really, well, one has already pushed US soccer up quite a bit, the 94 World Cup, and then 2026 could have a similar effect or even larger. So why don't we start with this? Because I find your career quite fascinating. You played for Real Betis, and you didn't have the development system we currently have. It was just kind of like, I don't know, like, can you walk us through what was that pre-1994 US soccer landscape? How did you make it to a top? Because I don't know if many people know, well, La Liga still is, but La Liga was one of the top leagues back then too, in the 90s with the Serie A. I think they were even ahead of the Premier League at that time. So talk about that pre-1994 World Cup US soccer landscape, and then we'll move forward from there.
Wow. Okay. That's, I mean, a good place to start because, it feels like to a certain extent, I was a child growing up here after I got here from Uruguay, obviously. I grew up here with the end of the NASL, and knowing that when the NASL folded, in around 1984, 85, around that time, we thought that was going to be the end of soccer. And so there was really nothing going on, no professional leagues. It's hard for people to imagine that at this time, but we were playing in college. We were playing for $500 a game here and there, whether it was Brooklyn Italians or something else. And you were doing whatever you could to play as much as you could. So obviously, when we qualified to the 1990 World Cup, it was a huge surprise. The U.S. hadn't been to a World Cup in 40 years, and what would make this team in particular qualify for a World Cup after such a long period of time, considering we didn't have professional leagues, we didn't have anything, and so we did qualify for that one, and that led into that period of time between 1990 and 1994, in which, fortunately, because we went to the World Cup, some of us had some opportunities to go overseas. And back to your point now, and I signed overseas after the 1990 World Cup with a small club in Spain called Unión Esportiva Figueres, which was about an hour north of Barcelona, right on the coast, right by Girona. Obviously, everybody knows Girona now, but back then Girona hadn't. Figueres was a bigger club at the time, and so I signed for that club in second division in Spain, and I thought that was a great opportunity. At the time, I had an offer from Roda JC from Holland to go into the first division of Holland, but I thought my goal was to play first division in Spain at some point. So I'm going to go right to second division there, improve myself, and do the best I can. So I signed with that small club. We had 2 great seasons. I was fortunate enough to have as teammates guys like Tito Villanova, who eventually coached at Barcelona, and Teen Marcus, who's now the coach at Qatar. Peter Vermees, on the second year on my recommendation, they brought him in. So, in those first 2 years for me in that second division, I made the league's best 11 2 years in a row. And that led to Betis wanting to come after me. But you have to remember, at that time, what was difficult was that there was only 3 foreigners allowed on the field at one time. And so signing for a big club in Europe was certainly not easy. Not that it's easy now. But now when you look at most clubs have at least 50% of their players from outside their country. And it used to not be that way. Matter of fact, when I signed for Betis, the club had enough money to sign 5 foreigners, but only 3 could be on the field at one time. So if I started one game, and if there had to be a couple of foreigners sitting on the bench who could only come in for a foreigner. So you had a lot of pressure to perform all the time, not only because obviously you wanted to, and because a club as big as Betis demanded it, but because you were fighting with other guys on the team, and it wasn't the 11, it was the 5. So you were fighting with the 5 to get a spot, and so it was different times. But certainly, I wasn't the only one. There were guys like Paul Caligiuri. There were, guys like Eric Winalda and John Harkes and Roy Wegerle, guys who were going overseas to try to make a name for themselves at the time, because obviously here in the U.S. between 90 and 94, we didn't have a league. So that's kind of where we were. I took the step. That's where I wanted to be. That's where the best football in the world was, and I wanted to be part of that. I always wanted to be a professional player.
So you played for Al Betis, if I'm not mistaken, for 3 full seasons, and then you came back to the U.S. when MLS finally opened, because MLS wasn't around in '94. I believe the first season was '96. That's when you came to the Metro Stars, and that's where you played. I was wondering a couple things. So you explained how you made it there, which it's a little bit like kind of crazy how players had to do it back then, right? You just have to like figure out, there was no pathway. You had to make your own pathway to get there. There were lots of risks involved. Well, nowadays you have a path to make it to Europe. It's much easier. Yes, I do think it's not easy now, but it's much easier now. We can agree on that. When you came back to Major League Soccer, how much different was that for you? Not the US. I mean, you were used to the United States, but you're coming from a league where you just mentioned all the pressure to consistently perform because you could lose a roster spot. I'm sure the pressure from the fan base was also really big already back then in Spain, just like it always has been. When you came back to MLS, How much different was that? Because even MLS, you go back to 96 or 95, whenever it was the first season you played for the Metro Stars that are not the Metro Stars these days anymore. MLS has changed so much. And can you talk about that change of like going from La Liga to a league that didn't even exist yet? It was just starting.
Well, let me correct you there a second. So I signed when I went to Betis from Figueres. They bought me from Figueres after my second year there,
Mm-hmm.
and when I went to Betis, I signed a 4-year contract in '92. Um, Betis had just dropped to second division, so I thought, I had some other offers. Valencia had been interested, Espanyol had been interested. I decided to go to Betis because I thought, especially with having lived in that second division for 2 years, that we would go straight back up. So I spent 2 years at Betis, really in second division.
Mm-hmm.
Um, had a lot of injuries there. Unfortunately for me, I don't think I ever played more than 6 or 7 games in a row at Betis, which was really unfortunate. But if you recall now, because obviously you weren't born there, but I had a bad injury at the World Cup in 1994 where I took an
Mm-hmm.
elbow to the head, and my skull was fractured, and so I was out of the game for about 5 or 6 months. But I was in the middle of my Betis contract, so after the '94 summer, when I went back to Betis had signed other players in my position. We had just moved to the first division. To La Liga, and they had signed in particular Stosic, who was a great Yugoslavian player at the time, to play in that position. And so, and they kept me out of the roster because the doctors wouldn't allow me to play that year after my injury in August. Until they said until December I could not get on the field. Matter of fact, I saw a couple of doctors, one here in New York City, who was the doctor for the Olympic boxing team, who told me if you were a boxer, I would never allow you to box again, because if you get hit in the head with the same force again, you can die. So it's basically where I was. The game was obviously very important to me because of where I grew up and what it meant to me and my family. So quitting was not going to be part of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed at Betis until December, and then in December at Betis, I think we were third or fourth in La Liga at the time. And I talked to the coach about it, and I said, "Look, well, I want to play." And he said, "Well, you want to play, it's likely it's going to take a while. We have a roster, and we like you here. We want you to stay here. But the starting 11 is what it is." And so I started looking for an option to go somewhere else. That December, I got picked to play in the World All-Star game in Milan, and played that game. I scored a goal there, and out of the blue came an offer from Tigres in Mexico, and
Yeah.
and so.
And you went on a loan, right? But it was a loan.
Well, I'll explain to you a little bit. So out of the blue comes this offer from Mexico, and I really, I was familiar with the Mexican League, but not a whole lot at the time. In particular, being from New Jersey, living and growing up in New Jersey, we don't hear as much as if you grow up in the southern part of the United States. And so I started to do a little research on Tigres and found out, obviously this is a huge club, and although I had heard the name and all those things, I didn't know the magnitude of the fan base of Tigres. And as more people inform me about it, I decided I'm gonna take the deal. I'm gonna go to Tigres. And so as it so happened that the MLS is going to start likely in 1996. So MLS kind of came in and got in between sort of the deal and said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take you from Betis, we're going to buy you, we're going to loan you to Tigres, and then you have to come back when the league starts. And I was like, I debated that a little bit, but I thought, we're going to start a league. I have to be back here for the league. If I sign with the league, there's a good chance that other players like Eric Winalda, like John Harkes, like Alexi Lala, it's like, well, there's a better chance that these guys will be encouraged to come back and play. Not just because I signed.
Why would you encourage Alexi to come, man?
Yeah.
We should have kept him in Europe.
Alexi at the time, I think, was playing in Italy, Serie A, which was, it was basically like playing in the NBA. So Serie A was far and away the best league in the world at the time. So that was important. And so other guys, and I figured if some of those guys got encouraged to come back, then that would open the doors to most Americans to try to come back and help the league. And so I did that. I made the agreement. Then I went to Tigres. Had Tigres, because of the point system over the couple of years, was in a really bad spot in terms of relegation. And although we had a good season and we went into the playoffs that second year and we actually won the cup at Tigres, the team still dropped. I felt bad for leaving because I loved the fans there and the fan base was incredible. And, although there is that huge pressure in Mexico when you play for a big club like that, the fans always love you at, clubs like that. Where I felt like in Spain, it's not always the case. It's very much the hot and cold. You're doing well, the fans love you. You're not doing well, the fans don't like you, and you have to deal with that. Can you go out to dinner tonight? Can you not? And I found that in Monterrey, the Tigres fans were so loyal to their jersey and their uniform and the love for the club. And it was a love for a club that I hadn't seen before, and I really enjoyed that. And but unfortunately, I already had signed a deal, and I had to come back to the U.S. And I say unfortunately because I would have loved to stay, but at the same time, I think it was a good thing because I did want the league here to succeed, and I was the first player signed. So when I signed with the league, there was no names for teams. There was no players. So I just signed believing, okay, we're going to put a league together. I'm the first player in the league. But all I asked was that I would either play for the New York team, whatever that was going to be, or for the DC team because my wife was from the area and I wanted to be on the East Coast. So that was it. That's the only there was no name. And then the name Metro Stars came. So then I finished that season with Tigres. We lost to Necaxa in the semifinals. After knocking out my friend Marcelo Balboa, who was at Leon at the time, we knocked them out in the quarterfinals, made it to the semis, and Necaxa with the great Alex Aguinaga knocked us off, and I immediately flew back to the U.S., and I joined the Metro Stars in the third game of the league. They had already played 2 games, so I joined the league in the third game.
But joining MLS, a league that it's just something I can't really visualize. That's what I'm wondering. The league, that was literally the third game of that team, but not just the team, the league. That's not a new team in the league, just the league was new. Was there any pressure, any fans? What was the environment there? Because for you, you're coming out of La Liga, high pressure, coming out of Liga MX, high pressure, and then MLS. Nowadays, it's grown a lot, but at that time, like, how was that aspect of it, the early days of Major League Soccer? That's what I'm very curious about, because I couldn't experience that at the time. I was 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to explain because you didn't have you can't say you have a love for the team because the name was just put together, Yeah, of course I love my area. I wanted to play at Giant Stadium, which was always, let's just say, a dream. We call a lot of things a dream, but let's just say that was a dream for me to play at home in my home stadium. So that was nice. But you really don't. You barely even know the uniform. You don't know the logo. It's kind of
the fans also the fans they don't they're not connected with it yet. There's no connection until you build because it's interesting. We talk about soccer culture. A lot of these teams across the globe, they have a culture within the team just because there's so much history, moments, good, bad. When we talked about relegation with Tigres and the fans stick around, Betis, and then play in the Champions League. That takes time. And obviously a team that just was built, it's not there yet, right?
It was actually a funny story. When I signed with, I came back to play for the Metro Stars. So I got here, I think it was on a Wednesday night after we lost to Necaxa the night before. And I went to practice the next day on a Thursday. No, I got here on a Thursday. We were playing on Wednesday. Anyway, I went to practice on Friday. I had one training session with the team because we were going to play Saturday. And right after the training session, we were going into a hotel. So we went to the hotel that night. My car got stolen that day at the hotel. So it was really a rough start with the Metro Stars, as I had just arrived the day before to the team. And we stayed in a hotel the night before the game at home. And my car got stolen that day.
In New York?
Yeah. It was right across from Giant Stadium. So it was like welcome home, I started my Metro Stars career with my car getting stolen the first night of the first game. So I had to deal with new team, new stadium, new team.
New car
getting stolen. There was so much going on in 48 hours. It was crazy. Yeah.
And Tab, let me ask you a question. I don't even know how much you want to dive into this aspect of it. MLS still is these days as it's an American league, like just like NBA. It's like franchise based. It's a closed league. They worked with U.S. Soccer to get that done, and it is what it is today. And there's no debating that the league has made tremendous growth. There's no arguing with that. So, one question for you: do you think the current structure, the way it's built, with no promotion relegation, so it's not an open pyramid. You can't get a small investor and move up the ranks. It's more of like a ultra wealthy person has to pay a very high franchise fee to come in. There's benefits to that because you get a lot of money flowing in very quickly. You get a new stadium, infrastructure is good. Do you think that the current structure will take US soccer to the next level? Clearly it worked to get things going, and based on what you're saying, and I agree with you, and I didn't live that, but I don't think it's debatable that US soccer is far ahead of what it was in the 90s in terms of being accessible and having a path to becoming a professional. I don't think it's accessible to all. I think that's a fair assessment to make. Do you think the current structure will take us to the next level, or do you think at some point U.S. soccer will have to intervene or find a way to have an open pyramid like we have in most countries in the world? Mexico doesn't have it anymore. They used to, as you said. Even a friend of mine played for Tecos in Liga MX back in the 90s. Marcelo Gonçalves, he was a center back for Brazil, and he played there, and they no longer kind of exist because they're not. Do you think the current structure is the right one? You're not sure? Do you think we have to open it up eventually?
Look, I mean, I think I'm obviously not at league meetings, and certainly when you're asking, someone to come into the league and play and pay $500 million to come into the league, you know, I don't think that particular investor is going to be happy if someone who paid 2 million to come into a lesser league comes into his same league and is competing in the same place. I don't think they'd be happy with that. So I'm not sure that there's a possibility for a change there, unless at some point, I'll start with that first. I don't think there's a possibility with a change there unless at some point MLS, let's say, grew to 40 or 45 teams and decided to do their own, sort of promotion relegation within the same franchises. And then that would make sense for the owners, because at the end of the day, that's what this is going to be about. But I think the bigger issue to look at is certainly the fan base, because that's what's going to determine whether soccer is going to make it long term or not. And we can say that, obviously, and you mentioned this, the strides that the league has taken. No one has seen that more than me and my generation of players and the people older than me. We've seen that change, and the change is so incredible that for all the young people listening, they can't even imagine what it used to be like and what it is now. So it would, having said that, I think what's important is how we get the game to the people. So, for example, and I've said this a few times, unfortunately. So we're 30 years in from the beginning of the league, practically,
Right.
and we still don't necessarily walk in a bar and hear people talking randomly about MLS teams or soccer. We don't hear that, right? And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying it as reality of where we are. So, like, if I saw you down the street, or if I'm talking to somebody about soccer and I said to you, hey, Kyle Walker is not playing this weekend. I wonder what's going on. Is he injured again? Is he, like, what I'm talking about? But if I said to a Red Bulls fan, Hani Mukhtar, who was the MVP of the league, by the way, is not playing this week for Nashville against Portland, they wouldn't know that. They would have no idea. Like, they would, so the fan bases are very much, not only are they small, but they're very much only dedicated to the section where they are. Like the fans of it, I feel like the fans of the teams are just fans of that team for that weekend. It's not a fan of the whole league. It's not a fan necessarily. And I'm not, obviously, I'm generalizing, right? Because you're going to have a couple hundred fans in particular the guys behind the goal. You got a couple hundred fans who may know, by the way, every player on their team and will know players on other teams randomly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think MLS is in front of the general public enough for people to have discussions about, hey, I like Hani Mukhtar better than I like Nico Lodera. I like so and so better than someone. Like, those conversations are not happening, and they're not happening not because MLS is not doing a good job, and not because the MLS is not a good league, because we have to admit MLS is a good league. You can't say it's not. It's a competitive league. It has good players in it. It can compete against other leagues. Is it the best league? No, it's not, but it's competitive. But we need the fans to discuss that. We need the fans to talk about it. We need the fans to hate the other teams. We need that competition, not just on the field, but we need it in the bars. We need it on the street. And I don't think we've made too many strides as far as that's concerned, going back to the 90s.
Don't you think, though? Sorry to interrupt with that,
Yeah,
Tab, but don't you think that's a little bit because these teams are not community-built teams? They're teams that a billionaire just comes in, pays a massive fee, and it just grows out of the ground, a stadium and a team, rather than the teams you talked about in Europe and everything. I'll even talk about some of the Brazilian ones. They are community-built teams. So they're built essentially many, many years ago by the fans. They grow, and it goes from generation to generation. Like Palmeiras is my team in Brazil, built by Italians, had to change their name because of World War II. There's so much history, and it's a community built club rather than a lot of the MLS teams. Not all of them. Some of them have a lot of. If you go back to Sounders, they've been around for way much longer than most teams, and you see that in the fan base. The Sounders fan base, for example, is different than maybe the average fan base in MLS, like you were describing, which I know you were generalizing, but I think the generalization is fair. I think that's what most of them are. They are just, it's not really a passion for that team. It's more of, I'm a fan. They represent my city, and over the weekend, I'm going to go there and cheer for them. And when I go home, I don't care if we win or lose, and we move on from it. And they don't know about the rival, like they don't know much about the teams, and it's not really a cultural thing. Do you think it's anything to do with that? Because I think that's a little bit of the issue with MLS. And you might ask, that's not MLS' fault. It's not their fault. It's the way they built themselves. But I think that's one of the consequences of having a franchise-based system. Don't you think, with MLS at least?
Well, look, and I understand what you're trying to say there. I think they are community based, because you couldn't tell somebody in Nashville that they, you know, like yes, there's an owner that comes in, there's someone who invests and puts a team there. I think the local fans really care about their team. So it is community. They do go to the game. They don't necessarily have the passion that Independiente fans will have in Avellaneda in Argentina, or that, you know, any club, like you said, Palmeiras in Brazil, which, for example, has their facility. You hop over the wall and you're at Sao
São
Paulo.
Paulo. Oh,
I mean,
you know, even how do you know that? How do you know
well,
that?
yeah, I've been around in soccer a little bit, so I know a
I've
little bit
noticed
about
that.
soccer.
I
But
didn't know you would know that specifically. Crazy.
yeah, so I understand what you're saying. I think my point was more about the fans. So I do think that the fans care about the teams in their communities. What I'm saying is the game is not out there enough to the general public for random people from Omaha, Nebraska, to be fans of. You know, I'm sure there's a ton of people in Omaha, Nebraska who are Cowboy fans. I'm sure there's a lot of people in New England who are Cowboy fans. And obviously there are more fans in New England, all that. I get that. But my point is, they know who plays where, they know who gets transferred where. And I think we don't have that. And I think, you know, the difficult part is that TV runs all the leagues, right? And the TV money is really important. But I think at some point, what's also important is that when I traveled, and this is a good example, actually. So Real Betis called me a couple months ago and said, hey, can you help us promote our game against Manchester United in San Diego on July 30th? Can you go? Juan Mata is going to be representing Man United. You go and represent us, and you guys can do all these appearances. So I do that, right? But I go to the airport in Newark, and I'm getting ready to fly to San Diego, and I'm watching, and as I'm watching, and this will go back a couple of years, Liverpool's playing Everton, right? At the same time, I'm watching Liverpool Everton at the TVs at the airport, and there's another EPL game, which was, I don't know if it was Tottenham against somebody, but that game is also on different TVs at the airport, and I'm thinking, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Why do we have at the airport? And I'm not, obviously I'm not blaming the airports. That would be ridiculous. I'm saying, like, this is what people should be seeing all the time, even if they're not really watching. How do we get our game? How do we get MLS on all the TVs everywhere? Kind of because the EPL is doing it. They're on all the TVs, and I'm watching on a random Saturday that I don't care about. That I'm flying to San Diego to represent Betis, which is a Spanish team, by the way. I'm not representing Red Bulls anywhere, right? I'm representing a Spanish team in San Diego, flying from my home in Newark to San Diego, watching EPL games in the airport. And I'm watching guys that I recognize all the time because they're constantly on TV, right? And that's what we need. That we need. So how do we get there? How do we get for the general fan base to 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 have? And it takes time. But I think we've had almost 30 years so far. How can we take the next 10 years and take advantage of the next World Cup to make it a game that everybody can watch for free everywhere, so that people get to know the league? Because otherwise, okay, yeah, you have an Apple subscription, that's great, you can watch it, but chances are you're only watching your team. You're not watching any other game, even if you have this subscription for the game.
So I'm not going to expand too much on that because if we talk about Pro Rel, we'll go for like 2 hours on it. But I want to
Gotcha.
add one thing to what you said because I think it's important. Um, from a cultural standpoint and popularity, I think we can agree that for soccer to surpass football in this country, I can't see it happening in my lifetime, probably my children's lifetime. It's just so, like football is just such an American thing. It's not going to happen. Basketball too. Baseball, I don't know what the projections are, but baseball is still overly popular ahead of soccer. In terms of culture, right? Not people playing. I know in terms of people playing, soccer is very high in terms of recreational soccer in this country. Don't you think because of that, maybe soccer needs a different structure from the standard Americans? We're not going to reach or surpass or even come close to these leagues by doing the same thing. If you have an open pyramid, all of a sudden you have a minor team in Omaha that has a shot in getting promoted, and maybe the community gets more involved. And then these teams might have more free academies because they can invest in the team, move up the ranks. With that, you get solidarity payments from FIFA. Well, not from FIFA, from future transfers of players that you develop, which is something that a lot of the pay-to-play clubs miss out on because they're not eligible to get the the solidarity payments for future transfers. I think Pulisic was a good example in Pennsylvania that I think his club that he played for
PA
didn't.
Classics.
Yeah, I don't think they were eligible to get solidarity payments. I think from these multiple millions and millions of dollar transfers that Pulisic had. Don't you think that that would be a way to outreach multiple communities? Because you talked about like no one from Omaha will ever, unless they're from like Miami or from Nashville and they move there, they're never going to care about MLS. Like, what reason do they have to? Right? It's just, and you might be saying, well, why do they care about the NFL team? I mean, that's just American culture at this point. NFL, wherever you are, even me, I'm not a big football guy, but when I was in high school growing up, I'll be watching it with my friends. We're talking about it. And then there's college football. Everyone's eating pizza, wings, watching games. That's not something with our culture when it comes to soccer, unless you go to some small communities in the US, like Brooklyn, the Italian Americans, Miami, a Latino community, California, LA, San Diego. So do you think maybe opening that pyramid could be a way to fix the issue that you mentioned? I understand the investors will never want to do it unless their asset is losing value, unless the next franchise fee in MLS starts to tank. That could be a way. But yes, the way things are going, you're not going to convince the investors. That's for sure. I agree with you on that. But could that different approach be what changes what you just mentioned, or no?
Well, but what I think you're saying is that you're basically giving up on the fact that soccer is not going to be in the culture of this country, and that's the one thing that I don't think we can give up on, because if this sport is ever going to be big for real in the U.S., We need it to be in the culture. We need
I'm not
people.
giving up on that. Just to make that, I'm not giving up on that. I just think that doing what other leagues do will not get MLS to reach that. MLS is not even the most popular professional soccer league in the U.S. That's a big issue.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I think that the part that's more important is how do we figure out how we make the sport part of the culture? How do we figure out how we make people um, get together to watch the MLS games and have get the chicken wings, but to watch MLS games, right? So because by the way, they're doing it for the EPL. I mean,
Mhm.
Saturday mornings. How many bars do you know? I don't even know where you live.
I,
How
I I'm
many
in I'm
bars do
in
you know?
I'm in
People go
Florida
out.
now, but I went to Charlotte for the first Charlotte home game, and I was there. The Charlotte FC, the new MLS franchise, the first game they had, I was there for their game at Bank of America Stadium. And then the night before the game, I knew some people in Charlotte. I'm like, guys, want to do something? I'm here in Charlotte, and I think it was called, was it Four Corners, something like that. It's a whole street with Premier League bars. So it was a Manchester United one, a Tottenham one, a Chelsea one.
Right.
Um, I mean, that's probably what you're talking about. MLS having teams with their, like, not them, but like essentially fans making their own bars, and people were there Saturday morning watching Premier League games in a bar in Charlotte,
Right,
North
and
Carolina.
you have to think about this. In the late '90s, when MLS was already existed, the EPL didn't exist like this here.
Mhm.
It was just some league that they played in England. That's all it was. The
That played
EPL, if
horrible
you can
football.
recall, the EPL became huge in this country no more than 10 years ago. Unless I'm getting that really wrong, let's say 10, let's say 14 years ago.
No, I think
Not
you're right.
much
Like
longer.
10 to 15 years. Yeah.
Somewhere in there is when the EPL started to go like this in this country. So if the EPL can do it, MLS certainly can do it. I think they just have to figure out a way how they're going to get in front of the public and how they're going to make things that happen in MLS become important, not just to the preaching to the choir type thing, but how do we open that up so that the average person thinks that somebody getting transferred somewhere is important within MLS. In that, you know, unfortunately, the competition that MLS has from the EPL and from Liga MX is very big competition, and that's within this country, it's difficult to overcome.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that would be we would have to do a whole episode on this that would take forever. We'll
Yeah,
pass on
yeah.
that one because I would just piggyback on this topic to the main topic of this video, so we can close part one here. 2026 World Cup, 1994 World Cup up to date. It was the most important World Cup in U.S. men's national team history. Do we agree on that? 1994.
No question. It was really the rebirth of soccer in this country.
Is 2026 more important in your opinion? Because 1994, I would argue it got us where we are today. 1994. And obviously after that, MLS came up, and USL has been growing too. That must be said. Popularity of the sport in general, interest in the national team. Do you think
And by
2020?
the way, USL is more community based, like you're saying,
Yes.
community based, right? It's more.
Yes.
It's not as. It's more organic. Let's
Mhm.
just say then, right?
Perfect take. I agree with you on that. I've been to USL games. I try to go to the Rowdies here whenever I can. I have friends that play for the Rowdies, and the fan base is a bit different. The atmosphere in the game is a bit different from MLS. It's not as rich, the infrastructure and all that, but it's more community based. 100%. Is 2026 more important than 1994?
No question. No
It is.
question it is. Because I think um, this is the moment where we have to make soccer part of the culture in this country. And this is the conversation that we're having. This is the moment where the average fan we need to convince some of the average fans of other sports to jump on board. We need to do that because if we don't do it this time, I don't think we'll ever do it.
Yeah. I think I agree with you. It is a. I gave you a very it's, and excuse my language. It's a shit question that I gave you because one can argue that we wouldn't be here where we are today without the 94 World Cup. So he was like, that's probably more important than 2026. But it almost feels like the 1994 World Cup got U.S. soccer to walk and the 2026 will get us to run. That's
Yeah, because look, if it doesn't happen, then the only growth we'll have is that MLS will have more teams, and the new owners will pay more than the owners before,
Mhm.
and that's where the growth is. And the great part is of that, by the way, because there is a good side to that. The good side is MLS teams have done an incredible job in terms of creating environments for player development, which we didn't have before. And we can argue, maybe you can say maybe not everyone's getting an opportunity. There's always, we can always find something that can be better. But the fact is, the more money that comes in the game, the better it is going to be for kids to be able to develop and to have environments to develop for free. So that will be a good thing. But I think we need more than that. I think we need the fans to jump on board. We need the average fan to jump on board. And that's, I think that is the big assignment of the 2026 World Cup.
And it's going to be very hard for any sports fan in America to ignore the 2026 World Cup. It's during the summer, so no NFL, no NBA, no college basketball, no college football, at least no games, right? There's like drafts and things like that, but no games. It's going to be all over the place. There's going to be fan fest. It's a great opportunity to bring, I would argue, even millions of new fans. Doesn't mean everyone will stick around, but you can get a good amount of people that will like, this is actually fun. I want to be a part of this. Where can I watch more games? Whether it is USL, does my city have a USL local team? Does it have an MLS local team? Can I watch some Premier League and get more people? And the more people you get, the more discussions and culture we build.
That's exactly right. Because I have to tell you, of all the things, all the games I've played, everything I've gone through in my career, I have more people come up to me and say, whether it's thank you for 1994, or I saw you in 1994, or I was a child in 1994 and became a soccer fan ever since. Tons of those people. I don't want to say every day, but at least a couple times a week, somebody will tell me something like this. So that's the effect that 1994 World Cup had. We really need to make 2026 stick. Because we can do that with, like you said, millions and millions of more fans.
Yes, and just to close this episode, because we're going to talk about the national team in part two. It's also about maybe converting a lot of the dual nationals in this country that are in between their parents' country, whether it is Mexico, South America, Europe, whatever it is, wherever they're from. Again, I know Europe and South America are not countries; they're continents. Just to make that clear, but to convert them to be U.S. men's national team fans and embrace U.S. soccer and build our own culture, rather than the millions of soccer fans in this country that love soccer but don't care much about U.S. soccer, which is what we need to grow here and drive interest. But everyone, thank you very much for watching. We're going to have part two where we're going to focus on the current U.S. men's national team and Tab Ramos' time as a U20 U.S. men's national team head coach. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like before you go, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.